Today, we journey to the arid Australian outback, where history recounts an insane skirmish between man and bird that would leave a strange mark in the history books. It was the year 1932, Western Australia reeling under the impact of the Great Depression and an unforgiving drought that had already dealt a severe blow to the region's crops, suddenly faced an additional and unthinkable challenge. Nearly 20,000 emus descended upon the wheat farms of Campion, intent to survive during their breeding season. The emus were attracted to the cultivated land of the farmers because it was good for finding food and water and raising a family. Farmers watched their livelihoods being decimated by the feathery foragers. In their quest for resources, these beaked battalions left a trail of destruction, consuming and trampling crops and damaging fences which allowed rabbits to enter and cause further harm. In the face of this mounting crisis, the farmers turned to the Australian government for backup. There were growing calls for succession by the wheat farmers who wanted to go at it alone without waiting for the government. Still, the officials recognised they needed the Western Australian crops and finally acquiesced with an unprecedented response. The government turned to the military, deploying soldiers armed with Lewis guns, typically used in warfare, to combat the emu incursion. The Minister of Defence, Sir George Pearce, even deemed it as an operation against the emus. Of course, there were conditions. Only military personnel would handle the guns and ammunition. The government of Western Australia would finance the troop transport, and the farmers would provide food and accommodations and pay for the ammunition. They even hired a cinematographer from Fox Movietone to film the war with the emu armies. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery led the endeavour to quell the emu population. The battle that had unfolded was far from straightforward in what became the Great Emu War. The emus, surprisingly resilient, made a formidable adversary. Their speed, agility, and overwhelming numbers made it difficult for the soldiers to gain the upper hand. They could run up to 50 kilometers per hour, disperse, and regroup. One army observer wrote, "Each pack seems to have its own leader now. A big black plumed bird which stands fully 6 feet high and keeps watch while his mates carry out their work of destruction and warns them of our approach." The war raged on for close to 6 weeks. However, much to the soldiers' chagrin and the public's bemusement, the results of the military campaign were unimpressive. After several weeks and thousands of rounds of ammunition, only several hundred emus had been culled, a minor dent in the vast, harrowing horde. 2,500 rounds of ammunition had been expended, or 10 bullets per bird. Major Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery's 7th Heaven Artillery said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." Under increasing public scrutiny and media ridicule, the government withdrew military assistance. The emus had miraculously triumphed in the Great Emu War. James Mitchell, Premier of WA, mounted a second effort, and this time it was more successful, killing thousands more of the birds before. At length, the army withdrew in December of 1932. Today, emu populations are managed through more peaceful methods, such as fencing, alarm systems, and resource management. The Great Emu War has become a peculiar footnote, but let it serve as a nudge to respect and acknowledge the intricate balance of our shared world. Thanks for watching Strange Obscure Stories.